Thank you. So we're moving on to our next presenter. Marco Jaimes, you're very privileged to present at a reasonable time of the day, I suppose.
It does help a little.
All envious of you. So he'll be presenting his presentation titled Promotion and Protection, the Cult of Franz Joseph in Education and Law. Here we go, Marco.
Wonderful. Thank you. You can all see the screen and hear me? I switched over to my mic. So, wonderful. Thank you. And thanks again to Dasha and Alexander for setting this all up. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk on this topic and to hear so many others talk about their fascinating research. So I'm going to jump right in. We have here an image of Franz Joseph in 1898, when the peoples of the Habsburg Empire were set to celebrate their monarch's 50-year reign. Franz Joseph, as you can see, was clearly elderly by this point, balding. You still see some hair, but with his iconic mutton chops that are depicted in paintings such as this in city halls, taverns, schools across the empire. Now, my presentation is going to focus primarily on the Bohemian crown lands, especially Bohemia and Moravia. But some of my arguments and conclusions, I think, can be taken out to some of the other regions of the empire. So in anticipation of major events that were scheduled for 1898, the Habsburg administration in Vienna had attempted to catalog, monitor, and regulate tributes to the emperor. In Prague, the Bohemian governor, Karl Coudenhove, issued instructions, as per directed by Vienna, as to how civil servants were to recognize, accept, and catalog these tributes. This memo would note how tributes should be organized into categories. Special notes should be made, especially of the results of any endeavor. And I have here an image of some of these cataloging that was going on. This is on the local level, the district level, in German, the Bezirk, or in Czech, it's the Okresny, Okres, I should say. And so a special emphasis you could tell from this is placed on the idea of there being results. So they want some significance to the fact that Franz Josef's name is going to be on this. And it's up to the judgment of these civil servants, especially the district officials, to note this. So it's not just flattery or labels, it's the importance of material well-being of the subject. Well, the Golden Jubilee would be cut short by the tragic assassination of Empress Elizabeth, Franz Josef's wife of 44 years. The administration's handling of the emperor's image remained ever present in daily life. Today, I'm going to talk about two specific branches, how they contributed to Franz Josef's image and brand. First, they're the school officials who sought to tie their endeavors and programs to the emperor. This is the promotion segment, hoping to secure official recognition and the benefits of imperial patronage. And then there are the officials in the prosecutor's office. These are both local and regional. And these officers were in charge of curbing efforts to undermine the emperor's image, securing, protecting his Franz Josef's image, and by extension, the general populace's belief in the secure Habsburg state and the Franz Josef as the protector of that state. Indeed, Franz Josef as Emperor of Austria and King of Bohemia was a brand representing the Habsburg Empire and providing a source of legitimacy for an administration that was often paralyzed by nationalist turmoil. So, as I said in the first part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about these school administrators seeking imperial favor and approval, and who were in charge of educating this next generation of Habsburg citizens. So they emphasize in their documents, and what I'll detail, Franz Josef's role as a guardian of national rights, protector of the children, think of the children, who in the future would protect the emperor when called upon. And this becomes obviously important for World War I in 1914. The second part of my presentation is addressing those prosecutors' offices who protect the emperor's image in the face of slander and libel action. Like most monarchies, the Habsburg state forbade any acts that denigrated the ruler's image, but the practicality of these laws in the system has a surprising amount of leniency. So we see autonomy exercised by these civil servants, these officials. Fundamental to maintaining the Franz Josef cult of personality is the administration's cultivation of that image throughout his reign. Beyond 1898, which my presentation circles, there are birthdays, anniversaries, other significant occasions to celebrate Franz Josef, and these were cataloged, if not directly supervised, by state officials. bureaucrats, especially those district heads, district commissioners, were responsible for monitoring the events, as you see here, and recording the tributes paid to Franz Josef. And so one of the most frequent petitions we see into these offices are efforts to name things after Franz Josef or the royal family. And these go into local capitals, and then the sort of hierarchy of this is it goes to the local town, then to the regional center, like Prague or Brno, and then up to Vienna, though sometimes Prague and Brno get the final say. The content of these requests provide insight as to how both regional officials and school administrators viewed Franz Josef, since they're shaping their requests to fit within these expected parameters. Naturally, the administration in Vienna and even in Prague wants to keep these firm guidelines. They don't want to go willy-nilly. And for any of you who are familiar with Daniel Janowski's book about Franz Josef's cult in Vienna and Poland, he talks a lot about those examples. But so in 1897, we have the example of a Czech language school in the town of Ložtice that requests to name a local boys' school for Franz Josef. And they submit in this petition this appeal addressed to Franz Josef himself, but also the civil officials, talking about the empire's values of education and development, and the buildings being recently constructed, showing how this all, greatly extends Franz Josef's symbol as a protector of children and as guardian of education. And this was eventually approved, but again, to show the fact that they're not just rubber stamping these things, there's a case around the same time in a nearby town in southern Moravia, Uherský Brod, where town officials want to name their school also after Franz Josef. And they use the similar arguments. It's built according to these great standards, symbol of education, but Vienna actually refuses. So we see that these petitions go all the way up to Vienna, and the Viennese officials, removed from the local politics by an extent, who decide not to approve or approve these Bohemian schools, these Czech language schools specifically. Now, in addition to these naming rights, we also have schools being important backdrops to celebration. And so organizers, local officials, teachers groups will organize celebrations for Franz Josef. And in 1888, so a decade before the Golden Jubilee, we have Franz Josef's 40th Jubilee, as well as the 200th anniversary of the local school. This school is in Mlada Boleslav, and the organizers appeal to, quote, and they use citizens of the region. And there's a huge interplay between citizen and subject that happens in a lot of these appeals. But so they address the citizens of this area, and they say, come celebrate Franz Josef's reign, under which, quote, oppression has passed, and quote, injustice has been eradicated. So again, promoting this idea to the people at large that it is under Franz Josef that we have flourished. So promoting this cult of personality. Now, a key angle for the schools are legal reforms that have happened under Franz Josef's reign. In 1869, the Imperial Parliament passed the Reichsvolksschulgesetz. This is the famous imperial law that, building upon early reforms, devolves a lot of educational authority to local boards, and also dislodges the Catholic Church from its traditional position of power. It mandates primary school for children aged 6 to 14, and provides guidelines to use local language. So this importance of the mother tongue being used in education. 10 years after this is passed in 1879, teachers groups in Gabons and Pelhřimov, so these are both German language and Czech language groups, praise Franz Josef in his role. They publish these letters publicly in which they lavish praise on Franz Josef. In another town, Napajedla, the local teachers group quote their deep, respectful gratitude and loyalty, end quote, to Franz Josef, and attribute him with the idea of, quote, rejuvenating national schools and awakening and fostering love and devotion among people everywhere, especially the youth. So again, protector of the youth here. And I have just some images. These are not from Bohemia or Moravia, unfortunately, but they do show these drawings and paintings of Franz Josef with the children. So this is him in Bad Ischl around 1900, delegation of school children. You see them dressed in their regional attire. This was very popular in Franz Josef's court. The idea that you would bring your national characteristics and display them before the emperor. I should note, Franz Josef was known to speak fluent Czech, though there's a big debate among the nationalists over whether or not he spoke it well. We have him here in Budapest, seeing the babies in a local foundling institution. And then finally, school children from Vienna visiting in Trump. So you can see this emphasis again on Franz Josef and the children. And while school administrators start to leverage that connection, when we turn to the other part of this presentation, my focus on the prosecutors, we see this effort where maybe if the education has failed, the children are questioning Franz Josef, the prosecutors will step in. We've already seen educational reform, and there is legal reform, as Jana and Peter noted in their presentations. Constitutional reforms that occurred in Franz Josef's reign included the October Diploma in 1860, the February Patent, 1861, and then in the aftermath of the Ausgleich, this devolving between Austria, Cisleithania, and then the Hungarian half. There are numerous individual rights recognized by the new government. But one of the things that remains constant, carrying back from the neo-absolutism period and even before that, is the protections of the emperor's image. Laws that specifically mandate no slanderous or libel acts against the monarch. And I have here the exact wording of that penal code. You can see it dates back officially to 1852, but this is a long tradition in many monarchies. It actually continues to today. I know a few years ago, Germany faced an issue because they had it on their books officially, and some comedian was making fun of a head of state. So these their ramifications continue to our contemporary times. But as you see here, be punished with a sentence of 1 to 5 years of hard labor. This theoretical liability is there, but the actual prosecution is much different. We see significant leniency occurring in the Bohemian Moravian region. And so in this section, I'm going to use some files compiled by the Chief Prosecutor's Office in Prague. They collected it all from the regional archives, which gathered reports from those regional and local authorities. And I should note, well, I'll wait so you can read that, but I do have a basic example text of some of their later cataloging of it. I know Alexander Adasha joking about the mundanity of the bureaucracy. They do come with a sort of uniformity in a lot of these documents, but it is kind of nice reading it because it makes things clearer and easier to go through. But so, whereas I note school administrators protect Franz Josef as guardian of education and protector of national traditions, this is the stick portion. We have the carrot and the stick, essentially. Ultimately, while the administration monitored these crimes extensively, and these paperwork, so I'll turn over to that, we see here a report from 1909. You can see how they lay out the name of the person, the place it occurred, the time, witnesses in other documents as well. But it's laid out very clearly here. The actual prosecution of these cases tended to be less notable because the way these officials see it, at least from what we can tell from the documents, is that these insults tended to be petty mockery and were not viewed as threats to the Habsburg state's hegemony in the region. However, we do see some exceptions, and this tends to come with the political radicalism, usually around key events. 1871, when we have protests over Franz Josef's refusal to be coronated. Well, he doesn't straight out refuse it. They try to sweep it away, the administration does. And then we have the Homeladina Trial in the early 1890s. 1898 also features some unrest in Prague when martial law is imposed. But we'll get to the more outrageous, seemingly outrageous insults. But I want to start with some of these, quote, petty mockeries. On January 19th in 1884, in Bruck's Most, Bruck's President Most, a group of men mocked Franz Josef's hunting habits, claiming that the loss at Königgrätz during the Austro-Prussian War in 1866 was because, quote, our emperor was in the Tyrol on a hunt. And this case, mocking perhaps the emperor's hunting prowess and his ability to lead a military. Of course, he no longer led the military from the front after the earlier wars of Italian independence, meant that at the end of the day, the administration, the local officials did not see this as a major threat. Threats like these, where the emperor is stupid, a thief, a rascal, a scoundrel, these things deemed irrelevant, were nevertheless brought to administration officials, these prosecutors. But in this case, for instance, this group of men, they got 3 months. So what's supposed to be at least 1 year of hard labor becomes 3 months of, I don't even have it noted here if it's actual hard labor or just incarceration. But the leniency, again, with these insults, I should also note, isn't just from them seen as petty mockery, but also because a lot of them, you'll note, are under certain circumstances that can mitigate, usually alcohol. And I want to turn to one of my favorite cases that happens in Yichen by Wenzel Zawadzki, who, according to the reports and in the presence of multiple witnesses, declared, quote, "Jan Hus was a person, but our emperor is merely a slave," end quote. So when I originally read this, I thought they're making this Czech nationalist claim, Jan Hus, this great hero in the Czech imagination. But the administration, the officials prosecuting this case are not concerned about the Jan Hus thing. They could care less about the comparison with Jan Hus. They're upset that Wenzel would say the emperor is a slave. He lacks this autonomy and doesn't have any awareness of what's going on, kind of thing. And they interview the witnesses who hear Wenzel make this claim. And throughout it all, they want to know, what exactly did he say about the emperor? And the witnesses talk about, well, was it a slave exactly? It was someone who didn't have autonomy. It was someone who was, obedient, subservient to something else. And that's what these prosecutors really focused on. And they go back to Wenzel after making all these interviews and the fact that Wenzel has claimed he was intoxicated. And the witnesses say, he maybe had a few beers, but he did not act intoxicated. And Wenzel says, he was merely spewing nonsense. He was drunk. They don't buy it, but at the end of the day, he again gets only 3 months sentence. So it's again this constant refrain of 3 months because they're not considered worthy of the officials' time, or not time, but the officials' full iron fist. They clearly spent the time. Now, addressing some of the more serious cases that get prosecuted, I want to turn attention to a case in Bomische Brod in 1884, where the case of Aloy Voska calls the emperor and the government rascals, oppressors of the working class, and notes, quote, "I'm ready to commit public violence, even if it means death." So in this case, the threatening of physical harm, when it goes beyond just calling him a rascal, it's the willingness of a sort of suicidal action, this idea of martyrdom, means that at the end, in this case, the prosecutors sought at least 3-year sentence and received for Voska, he got 3 years. So this is a full extent in which a case of lèse-majesté, this acts against the monarch, are prosecuted. Now, there is a fascinating thing. I wanted to focus especially on the officials, since of course we're talking about civil servants here at this conference, but the insults themselves offer some insight into societal issues in the Habsburg Empire, the idea of what are people concerned with, how do they connect it with Franz Joseph, how do they connect it with government officials. So there is something to be said on that aspect, but I want to focus, on how these officials are dealing with the autonomy they get. So just to summarize at the end, and I see that my unofficial 20 minutes of presentation are up. So I just want to conclude by noting, over a reign of nearly 70 years, Franz Joseph became a fixture in Habsburg society, with images and smaller statues ubiquitous across the empire. Through these physical representations of the sovereign, it became easy to associate him with positive themes of education, peace, stability, even when it might seem contradictory. So, it's an old monarch, he's been on the throne for decades, and yet he's leading us into a new century. The relevance of that association was not a natural alignment, as I said, contradictory perhaps, nor a process that was merely promoted by Franz Josef and his immediate circle. It involved the active participation of various parts of society. So this is the civil service, school administrators, prosecutors' offices, the district heads, as well as the general populace at large. The school children coming into the ceremonies, people attending the celebrations at local institutions like a school. So these officials become key supporters to this effort by promoting the cult of Franz Josef and protecting it from a libel and slanders act. And so in analyzing both school policies, school petitions, as well as the acts of lèse-majesté and their prosecution I'm trying to demonstrate this idea that the emperor's image was not static, but ever developing, ever evolving. And this is just sort of, one moment, this key plus or minus 10 years around the turn of the century. And so as much as the image was shaped and shared by the people in the region, it was also contested and involved these local bureaucrats, these local civil officials participate. And so with that, I want to turn it over to questions. I'm gonna end just with this great image of Franz Josef at Christmas time. This is during World War I. He's with his grandchildren. So again, connecting the emperor with the future of the empire. But stop the share and open it up. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Marco.